Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we are traveling north into the frozen heart of Manitoba, where lonely highways, silent lakes, and forgotten towns hide some of the most disturbing true horrors you have never heard of. These are not campfire tales or internet rumors, but real encounters from ordinary people who stepped out into the cold and discovered that something out there was already waiting for them. As you listen, pay attention to the places you recognize, the roads you have driven, and the shadows you have passed without a second thought, because every story tonight could easily belong to someone you know, or to you. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let's step into the shadows of the Manitoba deep woods, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Lucas Hargreave, and this happened when I was 32, after I inherited my uncle's farm just outside a dying town in rural Manitoba. I didn't grow up there. I'd only visited once as a child, and my memories of the place were blurred. Endless fields, a leaning barn, and a feeling that the land itself didn't want me. The farm had been abandoned for nearly a decade. Locals said my uncle Elias left suddenly, but the truth was simpler. No one would buy land where nothing stayed buried. Crops failed in strange patterns. Fence posts leaned overnight. Livestock refused to sleep near the south field. On my first night, I camped in the old farmhouse. Around midnight, I felt a vibration under the floorboards. Slow, rhythmic, almost like a chest rising and falling. I pressed my ear to the wood. The sound wasn't coming from the house. It was coming from the ground beneath it. By morning, the soil outside the porch had shifted. Fresh cracks ran through frozen dirt, pulsing faintly, as if something underneath was stretching after a long sleep. I told myself it was frost heave. Manitoba winters do strange things. But frost doesn't breathe. I spent the next day inspecting the land. The south field was worse than I remembered. Patches of soil darker than the rest, warm to the touch despite the cold air. When I stood still, I could feel it. A faint upward pressure beneath my boots, like standing on a giant lung. The nearest neighbor, Mrs. Calder, stopped by in the afternoon. She was in her 70s, sharp-eyed, and stood well back from the fence line, as if crossing it was forbidden. "You shouldn't be here after dark," she said flatly. When I asked about my uncle, her mouth tightened. Elias tried to starve it. That night, the breathing returned. Louder. The floorboards flexed. Dust fell from the ceiling in gentle bursts, timed perfectly with the rise and fall below. Then came the voices. Not clear words, more like murmurs vibrating through the walls. Familiar murmurs. My name. My uncle's laugh. A sound like someone knocking from beneath the house. At 2:17 a.m., the ground inhaled deeply, and the farmhouse settled an inch lower into the earth. That's when I realized the farm wasn't sinking. It was being pulled down. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at the kitchen table with a flashlight and my uncle's old notebook, found stuffed behind loose bricks in the fireplace. The pages were warped with moisture, filled with dates, crop diagrams, and frantic notes written in different inks, as if multiple versions of him had taken turns writing. One line appeared again and again. "Do not let it finish a breath." At dawn, I followed the cracks leading from beneath the farmhouse toward the south field. The soil there was soft, almost elastic. When I pressed a shovel into it, the ground pushed back. Not upward like pressure, but sideways, as if something beneath was shifting to avoid the blade. The breathing slowed when I stood still, faster when I moved. I remembered Mrs. Calder's words. Elias tried to starve it. That's when I noticed the rusted irrigation pipes my uncle had buried years ago, rerouting water away from the south field. Many were smashed now, crushed inward, not collapsed. As I pulled one free, a deep tremor rolled through the land. The breathing became ragged, angry. The ground didn't want to be dry anymore, and it didn't want me learning how to stop it. That evening, I decided to flood the south field again, to see if water calmed it. I dragged hoses from the well, ignoring the way the murmurs rose as the sun dipped below the horizon. As water soaked into the earth, the breathing deepened, slower, satisfied. The farmhouse stopped creaking. For the first time since I arrived, the land felt content, too content. The voices became clearer, not whispers anymore, conversations. My uncle arguing with someone, me laughing as a child. Sounds pulled straight from memory, vibrating up through my bones. Then the ground exhaled hard. The field collapsed inward, forming a shallow depression. In the center, the soil split open just enough for me to see movement below. Layered, folded shapes contracting and expanding like a massive organ buried under farmland. I stumbled back as the smell hit me. Wet earth mixed with rot and something metallic. That's when I understood. It wasn't alive in the way animals are alive. It was feeding on memory, using water and warmth to grow closer to the surface. Learning voices, faces, routines. And my uncle hadn't starved it to kill it. He'd starved it to forget him. I tried to leave the next morning. My truck started, but the tires sank several inches into the driveway, even though the ground was frozen solid the night before. The soil clung to the rubber like wet clay, stretching when I pressed the gas. The breathing had changed. It was no longer steady. It followed me, quicker when I panicked, slower when I stood still, like it was listening. Inside the barn, I found more of my uncle's work. Salt lines carved into the dirt floor, old heaters positioned in a circle, burn marks on the beams above, as if something had brushed against them from below. Elias hadn't been insane. He'd been performing maintenance. When I stepped back outside, the south field pulsed violently. A mound rose where the depression had been, pushing upward in a grotesque imitation of a rib cage. Then I heard my uncle's voice clearly for the first time. "Lucas," it said gently, from beneath the soil. "You're standing in the wrong place." I jumped back just as the ground snapped shut, swallowing the exact spot where I'd been standing. It knew where I was. It knew where I would be. I returned to Mrs. Calder just before sunset. She refused to let me inside her house, speaking through the screen door with one hand gripping a small cloth pouch filled with salt and dried herbs. "It's awake because you're new," she said. "Fresh memories, fresh voice." She told me the land was once a sink for slaughter waste, decades before my uncle bought it. The ground had been fed blood, warmth, and panic for years, until it learned how to hold on to what it consumed. Elias discovered that starving it, cutting water, heat, sound, made it weaker. But the longer it starved, the more violently it tried to remember. "He left," she said quietly, when it started remembering him too well. That night, the breathing became frantic. The farmhouse groaned as if bending downward. Cracks split the walls. The voices overlapped. Mine, my uncle's, strangers I'd never met, all begging, arguing, laughing. The south field rose higher, forming a shape that almost resembled shoulders beneath skin. I understood then. If I stayed, it wouldn't just take my body. It would keep me. Every memory, every sound. Forever breathing through the ground, I decided to finish what my uncle started. Before dawn, I cut the power to the well pump and smashed the control panel with a hammer. The ground reacted immediately. The breathing became shallow, uneven, like something suffocating. Cracks raced across the fields, splitting fences apart. The farmhouse tilted as if dragged toward the south field inch by inch. I dragged every heater I could find into the barn and set them ablaze, creating intense heat in one place while starving the rest of the land. Elias's notes mentioned confusion. The thing beneath the soil struggled when warmth and sound came from a single source. The voices screamed then, not human anymore. Distorted, layered, desperate. The ground convulsed, collapsing sections of field while the barn floor swelled upward. For a moment, I saw it. Not fully, just an outline beneath the dirt. A vast, folded mass contracting violently, trying to finish one last breath. I whispered my uncle's name. The breathing stopped. The land went still. The silence was worse than the noise. By mid-morning, the ground hardened. The cracks sealed. The south field flattened as if nothing had ever been wrong. No breathing. No voices. I packed what little I had and drove away before sunset. The farm sold within weeks, for less than half its value. The new owners planned to install irrigation, revive the land, bring life back. I didn't stop them. Sometimes starving something doesn't kill it. It just teaches it patience. Last winter, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. The audio was low, distorted, rhythmic. In the background, beneath the static, I heard it again. Slow, familiar, breathing. Months passed, but I couldn't forget the farm. Dreams haunted me, fields folding like lungs, shadows pressing against dirt, whispers crawling along my skull. My own voice mingled with others, echoing in places it shouldn't exist. One night, I received a letter. No return address, only a single line scrawled in shaky handwriting. It remembers you. It waits. I froze. My mind raced back to the south field, to the mound that had risen and collapsed, to the barn that had groaned like it wanted me inside. Every memory of the place seemed alive now, pulsing in my chest as if the farm had grown inside me. I knew I had left the land, but the land had never left me. I tried to move on, but the land follows those it touches. Water puddles ripple unnaturally when I walk past them. Soil cracks appear in my garden like tiny lungs. Occasionally, in dreams, I feel cold dirt pressing against my back, forcing me to rise with it. I've stopped looking for explanations. The farm taught me one undeniable truth. Some land is alive, and some memories cannot be buried. If anyone ever inherits property in rural Manitoba, heed this warning. Listen to the wind, feel the soil, and never, ever think you are leaving behind the things that dwell beneath. Because the farm does not forgive. It remembers. It breathes. And one day, it may call you back. My name is Amelia Rivers, and this happened when I was 24. I had rented a remote cabin deep in the whispering woods of northern Manitoba for a writing retreat. I wanted isolation, the kind that inspires creativity. I got it, too much of it. The cabin was small, wooden, and untouched for years. The locals had warned me. The woods remember. I laughed it off. Stories, I thought, the kind that you tell around campfires. The first night, I heard faint murmurs outside. Not animals, not wind. Whispers shaped like human voices, indistinct yet coaxing. At first, I thought it was stress, the isolation playing tricks. By midnight, the whispering grew clearer. Names. My name. My mother's voice from childhood, calling me. I ran outside to find nothing. Only the snow falling silently, trees swaying as if keeping a rhythm to an unseen pulse. When I stepped back inside, the cabin door slammed shut on its own. The whispers followed me into every corner. They weren't coming from the woods anymore. They were inside. I tried to leave, but my car wouldn't start. The engine turned over once, then died. And then I heard it. A low hum, resonating through the walls, in perfect synchronization with my heartbeat. Morning offered little relief. Snow had drifted differently than it should have overnight, forming patterns that resembled footprints, but not like any animal I knew. They led to the tree line, then disappeared entirely. Inside the cabin, I found scratches along the walls, delicate, deliberate, forming shapes I couldn't identify. I felt watched. Every glance at the windows revealed shadows, shifting slightly, always just out of focus, always gone when I looked directly. I tried to record the sounds, hoping to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. When I played back the audio, the whispers weren't recorded. They were replaced by static. And through the static, something else. A single syllable repeated over and over. Come. By late afternoon, the cabin itself seemed to change. The door was warped, windows slightly smaller, angles subtly wrong. My maps and notes were scattered as if handled by unseen hands, always showing a path deeper into the woods I hadn't taken. By evening, the hum returned. Louder now, synchronized perfectly with my pulse, my breathing. It was patient, deliberate, waiting. And then, from outside, a voice I knew well whispered my full name. Not a call, a command. I couldn't sleep. The cabin creaked, groaned, and whispered as if the wood itself were alive. Every shadow seemed to move when I blinked, reshaping into faces I recognized. My grandfather, old friends, strangers I had only seen in photographs. I tried to leave again, but the snow outside was different now. Every path I had walked was erased. The footprints that led to the woods returned, twisting unnaturally, circling back to the cabin. It was as if the forest refused to let me leave. By nightfall, I noticed a faint glow from the tree line. My curiosity, foolish as it was, pushed me toward it. The snow muffled my footsteps, but I could hear soft, coordinated tapping, like hundreds of tiny fingernails on wood and ice. The whispers followed me, layered, overlapping, repeating my name with a strange rhythm, almost a chant. My heartbeat synchronized with the cadence of the sounds. I realized I was being drawn deeper, not by choice, but by the forest itself. The glow shifted. Now I could see shapes moving, pale and elongated, hiding between the trees. And the whispers, they weren't calling me. They were imitating me. My own voice, twisted and warped, chanting for me to step forward. I stumbled back toward the cabin, desperate, but the structure had changed. The door frame stretched taller, the windows narrower. Every turn of my head made the room seem larger, yet suffocating at the same time. Ceiling beams bent inward, groaning as if breathing. The whispers followed me inside. Clear now, almost intelligible. Fragments of conversations, arguments, confessions I hadn't said out loud. They weren't echoes. They were recordings of my thoughts, projected with unnatural precision. I tried to barricade myself with furniture, but the cabin refused. Chairs slid across the floor by themselves. The fireplace soothed the chill, but the heat didn't stop the voices. They spoke through the walls, the floor, the ceiling, layering over themselves until I couldn't discern my own words from theirs. Then I heard a distinct, cold knock on the cabin door. Slow, deliberate. 2 knocks, then 1 pause, then 3 quick knocks, as if someone or something was counting, marking time. My instincts screamed not to answer, but a voice mimicking mine whispered from outside, "Let me in. It knows you're here." I froze, every muscle locked. I knew then that the woods weren't just alive. they were aware, and the cabin was merely a conduit. By midnight, I realized the whispers were no longer random. They were tracking me, learning my patterns, anticipating my movements. Every time I took a step, the chant would mimic the sound of my boots before I even made it. Every breath I drew was echoed back in mocking rhythm. I tried calling for help, but my phone displayed nothing. No signal, no calls, nothing. Even the emergency beacon I had brought refused to function. The cabin's walls seemed to hum with life, vibrating in sync with the whispers. I felt as though the forest and the structure were a single entity, watching, calculating, and deciding my fate. I grabbed the small fireplace axe, pacing nervously. Shadows moved independently of the light. I glimpsed shapes in the corners of the room. Figures crouched, elongated, always just out of focus. Every glance revealed more faces. Strangers, ancestors, people who had vanished in the woods. A soft, icy voice whispered from the window frame. "Why do you resist?" I understood then. The woods didn't just want me gone. They wanted me to participate, to become part of the whispers, a voice for the next traveler. Desperation pushed me to act. I tore apart the floorboards, trying to create an escape hole. Beneath, the soil pulsed with unnatural life. Dark, slick, almost fluid. It seemed to breathe, synchronized with the whispers and the rhythm of my heartbeat. Through the hole, I glimpsed movement. Pale, elongated figures rising from the forest floor, pushing through the snow as if the earth itself were bending. Their faces were familiar, but twisted. My ancestors, the missing travelers, echoes of the past, all staring at me with hollow eyes. I realized the cabin wasn't just a shelter. It was a trap, a funnel. Every traveler who entered became part of the network of whispers, feeding the forest's awareness. It learned from our fears, from our voices, from our memories. The wind howled through the broken floorboards, carrying voices that blended with my own. My reflection in the window no longer matched my movements. The image smiled at me while I panicked. I knew then there was only one way to survive: disappear, or the forest would absorb me entirely, my voice joining the endless chant, repeating my name for the next lost traveler. By the seventh night, I had learned to move without drawing attention. My footsteps no longer thudded. They slid, whispered along the floorboards. The voices responded, slower now, observing, calculating. The forest seemed patient, waiting for me to make a mistake. I ventured outside briefly, using the shadows to mask my movements. The snow no longer reflected moonlight. It absorbed it, creating a void that extended in all directions. Trees bent subtly as I passed, branches reaching toward me, not violently, but with intent. I found markings in the snow, runes etched by something large, clawed, or perhaps by the forest itself. They formed a pattern, like instructions or warnings. When I stepped on them accidentally, the hum returned, deeper, vibrating through the soles of my boots and up my spine. A sudden gust carried voices directly into my ears. Clear this time. They imitated my own thoughts, finishing sentences I hadn't spoken. Panic clawed at me, but I forced calm, understanding that fear was the conduit that the forest used to trap wanderers. I realized I had to outthink it, not outrun it. Every whispered syllable became a clue, every shadow a guide, every rhythm a map. The forest could wait centuries, but I had only tonight. Inside the cabin, I found a trap door beneath a rug I had overlooked before. It wasn't locked, but the whispers surged as I approached. They pleaded, warned, begged, but also mocked, repeating my deepest fears aloud. I descended into the crawl space. The air was thick, suffocating and damp with the smell of moss and decay. Shadows moved independently, coiling along the low ceiling, forming almost humanoid shapes. They whispered in unison, "You belong here." The crawl space widened, leading to a chamber beneath the cabin. The walls pulsed subtly, almost like living tissue, shadows moving beneath the surface. It was alive, and it remembered. Every visitor before me had left fragments behind, voices, memories, fear. I understood then that the cabin wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. It was a collector, a sentient trap built by the forest to store the echoes of those who dared enter. I left a small item from my backpack, a notebook, my pen, my jacket, as a token. The whispers responded, quieter now, almost reverent. For the first time in days, the forest seemed to pause, patient, observant, waiting. I climbed back into the cabin, careful not to disturb a single whisper or shadow. Outside, the forest was silent, but I knew the quiet was temporary. The following days, I stayed alert. Every sound, every shadow, every gust of wind became a signal. I learned to anticipate the whisper's rhythm, to avoid answering the forest in thought or voice. But the cabin had left a mark on me. My dreams were no longer mine. Each night, I heard faint echoes of the forest calling my name, even miles away. My reflection in mirrors sometimes moved independently, lips whispering words I hadn't spoken. I tried to tell friends, but no one could see or hear what I experienced. My isolation became total, yet the forest was never far. One evening, while reviewing footage from my small camera, I noticed something chilling. In each clip, shadows moved just out of frame, bending angles and shifting objects subtly. The whispers weren't just auditory, they were physical, reshaping reality to interact with me even when I wasn't present. I realized the cabin, the forest, the shadows. They had become extensions of my mind, exploiting my memories, fears, and thoughts. Escape wasn't about distance. It was about understanding, patience, and survival without reaction. The knowledge weighed heavily. I felt hunted, observed, and studied by something patient and ancient. I returned to the cabin once more, this time armed with only knowledge and patience. I moved silently, leaving no trace, interacting with the whispers only to mislead them, to confuse the forest's awareness of me. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of memories, not mine alone, but those of countless visitors who had vanished here. Faces flickered in the windows, shadows stretched unnaturally along walls, whispers rose and fell in hypnotic rhythm. I left the cabin without touching a single floorboard or wall. Outside, the snow had returned to normal. Footprints, runes, and subtle movements were gone. The forest appeared calm, silent, patient. It had learned my patterns, but I had learned to adapt faster. Now, months later, the whispers still reach me in dreams, but I do not panic. I respond only with silence, moving carefully, aware that the forest watches and remembers. Someday, another traveler will arrive, and the cycle will continue. The cabin in the whispering woods will claim their fears, their memories, their voices. But for now, I survive, marked yet free. The forest is patient. It always waits. My name is Derek Mason, and this happened when I was 27. I had just started a long-haul trucking job, hauling supplies across northern Manitoba. The routes were desolate, stretches of highway disappearing into endless forests and frozen plains. I was used to isolation, but that night, something different waited. It was past midnight when I drove along a section locals called the Forgotten Mile. No cell signal, no lights for miles, just snow and darkness. I noticed the first anomaly when a figure appeared on the side of the road, dressed in tattered winter clothes, waving frantically. I slowed, thinking it was someone stranded, but the figure never approached. The snow around them didn't imprint any footprints. I stopped the truck entirely. My headlights barely illuminated them. Then, abruptly, the figure vanished. Not walked away, not hidden in the snow. Gone. That's when the truck radio crackled, static first, then a whisper. Derek. My name. Clear. Human. Familiar. My heart raced. But I told myself it was interference, nerves, fatigue. Minutes later, the temperature gauge plummeted, frost forming unnaturally on the windshield from the inside. The truck's engine rattled as if something massive pressed against the cab, invisible but forceful. I realized too late that the highway didn't just stretch through Manitoba, it watched. And it had noticed me. I tried to call dispatch. Nothing. The radio kept repeating my name in static-laden whispers. Panic set in, and I pressed on, gripping the steering wheel until knuckles turned white. The highway stretched endlessly, yet every mile felt shorter, compressed, like the road itself was bending around me. A shadow appeared in the distance, pacing along the edge of the forest. It mimicked my movements, stopping when I stopped, tilting its head when I tilted mine. I blinked, but it remained perfectly synchronized. Then headlights flashed in the rearview mirror. Another truck? No. The vehicle was wrong. Too wide, no distinguishable driver, engine silent but headlights glowing like icy eyes. It followed me relentlessly, closing the distance even when I accelerated. I tried to stay calm, rationalizing the experience. Exhaustion, optical illusions, northern lights playing tricks through snow haze. But rational thoughts evaporated when the first voice called out from the back seat. Not static, not muffled. Crystal clear. You shouldn't be here. I glanced in the rearview mirror. The seat was empty. And yet, the whisper came again. Closer this time, brushing my ear like cold wind. You're mine now. The highway had chosen me. I drove faster, heart hammering, every nerve screaming. The shadow in the forest mirrored my acceleration perfectly, never losing distance. I tried turning off the highway onto a side road, but the GPS recalculated endlessly, looping me back to the same stretch. The radio began a rhythmic tapping through static, almost like Morse code. At first, I ignored it, but soon the tapping formed words. Stop, or be taken. My hands trembled on the wheel. The headlights of the ghostly truck behind me grew brighter, blinding at times, yet never touching me directly. I realized the forest wasn't just surrounding the highway. It was alive. Branches scraped against the cab like claws. Snow seemed to drift unnaturally, forming human shapes that stared from the tree line. Every blink, every shift in focus revealed new faces, travelers long lost to this road. Then a figure appeared directly in the middle of my lane. I swerved instinctively, tires skidding on black ice. The figure didn't move out of the way. Not human, not animal. Tall, slender, frozen, eyes glowing faintly orange. My heart skipped as I realized it wasn't dodging me. It was testing me. The truck behind emitted a low growl, vibrating through the cab. The whispers overlapped, some calling my name, some mocking me. The highway was alive, it was aware, and it was hungry. I tried to think logically. If the highway was sentient, I needed to act unpredictably. I switched lanes erratically, slammed brakes, accelerated, but the shadow and ghost truck mirrored every move. Panic rose. My breath fogged the cab, and frost began forming across the windshield again, obscuring my vision. Suddenly, the highway narrowed impossibly. trees bending inward to create a tunnel. Snow swirled violently, forming shapes that resembled bodies frozen in terror, their faces screaming silently. The whispers became chants, repeating my name over and over, layering with static so thick it hurt my ears. I noticed a sign half buried in snow. The paint was faded, letters jagged and worn. "Turn back or stay forever." Behind the sign, I glimpsed a pile of tires, twisted metal, and personal effects, remnants of those who had failed this test. The shadow in the trees gestured, pointing. A voice in my mind screamed, "Choose." Instinctively, I slammed the truck into a narrow shoulder, the tires crunching snow as the ghost truck halted behind me, unmoving. For the first time, the whispering ceased. Silence fell, suffocating. I dared to glance into the rearview mirror. The ghostly headlights were gone. The figure at the roadside vanished. But the highway didn't feel empty. It waited, patient, calculating. I stayed put, gripping the steering wheel, willing my pulse to slow. The highway was silent now, but the tension was suffocating. Every tree seemed to lean closer, the snow muffled only by an unnatural stillness. My instinct screamed that any sudden move could trigger another attack. Minutes or hours, I couldn't tell, passed before I dared to move. The truck creaked as I shifted it forward, tires crunching the icy snow. The stretch ahead looked normal, almost mundane, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The whispers had not returned, but the air felt heavy, laden with anticipation. Then I noticed it. Small, shallow footprints in the snow alongside the truck. Too regular, too precise to be animals. They matched my stride exactly, as if something invisible was walking in sync with me, keeping pace no matter how fast I accelerated. I realized the highway wasn't just haunted, it learned. It observed patterns, tested reactions, and trapped those who failed. I had survived this far by guessing, improvising, and staying calm. But it was clear that the road itself could wait decades for its next victim. The memory of the figure in the lane, the tattered figure, the ghost truck, haunted me, pressing on the edge of my mind. I knew the road hadn't released me. It had only paused. Hours later, I reached a rest stop, or what I thought was a rest stop. The place appeared abandoned, buildings frost-covered, windows cracked. The whispers returned, faint now, overlapping with voices I recognized. Truckers missing from this highway, their panic echoing through time. I tried to make sense of it, thinking perhaps a natural explanation existed. Frostbite, exhaustion, hallucinations. But then I saw the signs. Scratches along the doors, handprints in frost, vehicles buried in snow that seemed too old to have survived. The highway had been feeding on travelers for decades. Some disappeared entirely, others returned, broken and silent. The voices were fragments, echoes of fear and memory, layered across the road like sediment and ice. I spent the night at the abandoned rest stop, alternating between hiding and watching. Outside, shadows moved along the trees, mimicking my every movement. The ghost truck appeared again, silent, headlights dim, parked half buried in snow. I could see faint forms inside, pressed against glass, staring. By dawn, I knew my only option was to stay vigilant, never trust the road, and never stop moving. The highway did not forget. It did not forgive. And somewhere, deep beneath the snow and ice, it was already planning its next trial. By the seventh night, I had settled into a routine of vigilance. Every shadow, every gust of wind, every faint sound along the tree line was monitored. I learned to anticipate the highway's tricks. Flickering lights that mimicked headlights, snowdrifts shaped like human figures, and whispers that repeated my inner thoughts. I realized the ghostly truck wasn't just a vehicle. It was an extension of the highway's will, a sentinel watching for mistakes. Any hesitation or misstep drew attention. The forest surrounding the road seemed alive, trees bending subtly toward me, branches like fingers reaching for the cab. Then I saw it. A figure walking along the shoulder, perfectly synchronized with my movements. Its head tilted when I tilted mine, its pace matched mine exactly. But this time, it paused, waiting. The whispers grew louder, overlapping with my heartbeat. Voices from past travelers cried out, warning, pleading. I understood. The highway didn't just feed on fear, it collected it, storing fragments of those it had ensnared. I gripped the wheel tighter. Survival depended not on speed, but on thinking differently than the highway expected. One false move, and I would vanish like countless others before me. I reached a narrow bridge spanning a frozen river. The road was clear, yet the atmosphere was thick with menace. The whispers returned, repeating my name with an almost musical cadence, layered over the distorted echoes of past travelers. As I drove across, the ghost truck appeared behind me again, headlights glowing like icy eyes. This time, the silhouette was clearer. Inside, shadowy figures pressed against the windows, staring at me with hollow, empty eyes. I pressed my foot to the gas, tires crunching on ice. But the truck maintained pace effortlessly, almost floating over the frozen surface. The bridge seemed endless, yet I could see the horizon. The whispers became instructions, subtle suggestions, urging me to stop, turn, abandon the vehicle. My pulse raced, but I resisted. I knew the highway fed on panic. Suddenly, a gust of wind sent snow swirling violently, forming twisted shapes of human faces and hands along the bridge rails. They reached toward me, trying to distract, to unbalance me, to make me air. I forced focus, eyes fixed on the horizon. The ghost truck slowed, hovered, then vanished into the night mist. The whispers faded slightly, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence. For the first time, I realized I had survived this encounter. For now. After crossing the bridge, I kept moving cautiously, eyes constantly scanning. Every stretch of highway seemed to twist subtly, as if reshaping itself behind my back. I realized the road was aware of my presence, measuring fear, testing focus, learning patterns. Occasionally, I caught glimpses of figures in the distance, barely discernible in the snowfall. They moved unnaturally, synchronized with my speed. Some disappeared when I blinked. Others lingered at the edge of perception. The whispers returned intermittently, faint, overlapping my thoughts, forming fragmented sentences from memories I didn't share with anyone. I understood the cruel logic of the highway. It didn't need to chase. It merely waited for travelers to exhaust themselves, to panic. Fear became a beacon. Every heartbeat, every exhalation was noted, recorded. By nightfall, I reached another abandoned rest area. Tires buried in snow, frost-covered signs, remnants of travelers lost decades ago. The highway was patient. It could afford to wait for me, for anyone, for as long as necessary. I felt a heavy weight pressing on my chest. The forest, the road, the shadows, they were patient predators. I was not free, only temporarily released. The highway would remember me, and I would always remain a potential target. A lesson for those who would come next. By dawn, I had crossed the last stretch of isolated highway. The sun rose weakly, casting pale light over endless snowfields. The whispers had faded, the ghost truck vanished, and the synchronized shadows melted into the morning mist. I parked at a nearby town, hands still shaking, pulse racing. I had survived, but the highway had left its mark. Every long stretch of road, every empty intersection, triggered memory. The soft echoes, the mirrored shadows, the chilling presence of unseen observers. I tried to explain it to friends and colleagues, but no one understood. Some smiled nervously, attributing it to fatigue or imagination. I didn't argue. Those who experience the highway know the truth isn't meant to be explained. It is felt, etched into memory. Years later, I still drive, but never alone. Every time I traverse northern Manitoba, my hands grip the wheel tighter. My eyes never stray from the road. The highway is patient. It waits for travelers, learning, observing, storing fear. And sometimes, when the wind carries just the right chill, I hear faint whispers repeating my name, reminding me that I survived. For now, the haunted highway does not forgive. It only waits. My name is Lena Hart, and this happened when I was 29. I had grown up near the Manitoba marshes, vast, endless wetlands that few dared to explore. For me, the marshes were a place of solace and photography, until that night when solace turned to terror. I was driving along a narrow, muddy trail cutting through the marshes, headlights reflecting off still pools of water. The fog was thick, settling in pockets above the ground, making the landscape feel unreal, dreamlike. I noticed it first as a faint glow in the distance, like a lantern, bobbing slightly but without a source. Curious, I parked my truck and stepped out. The ground beneath me squelched, sucking at my boots. The lights moved, slowly, deliberately, weaving through the mist as if guiding me deeper into the marsh. I tried to follow, but the terrain twisted in impossible ways. Paths I thought I knew disappeared behind me. Then I heard it. A soft, melodic hum, low and resonant, coming from all directions at once. The lights pulsed in rhythm with the hum, almost breathing. Fear and fascination battled within me. Something about those lights felt intelligent, aware of me, and patient. I realized too late that I was no longer in control. The marshes had chosen me as their witness, or perhaps their prey. I stepped cautiously forward, following the glowing lights. Each step sank into cold, sucking mud. The hum grew louder, harmonizing with my heartbeat. Shapes flickered at the edges of my vision, shadows of twisted reeds, distorted reflections in the water. But every time I looked directly, nothing was there. The lights split, forming a semicircle around me, hovering just above the water's surface. I tried to back away, but the ground betrayed me, thick mud holding my boots. The hum intensified, almost pleading, almost commanding. I felt pressure in my chest, as if invisible hands were guiding me forward. Then I saw movement within the lights. Figures, barely human, elongated and fluid, walking on water. Reflections distorted beyond recognition. Their eyes glowed faintly, matching the lights above. One turned toward me, and I felt a psychic weight, a sense that it could peer into my memories, my fears, and my secrets. I froze, every instinct screaming to flee. My camera hung around my neck. Instinctively, I raised it, snapping a picture. The flash illuminated the marsh briefly. The figures recoiled, wailing in an unearthly chorus, echoing across the water. In that instant, I understood the danger. The lights weren't just lights. They were lures, intelligent, patient, and hungry for the living. The wailing echoed in my ears as I stumbled backward, mud sucking at every step. The lights pulsed faster now, circling me in a deliberate pattern, herding me deeper into the marsh. I realized the figures weren't walking. They floated, gliding across water and mud without leaving a ripple, as if the marsh itself obeyed their will. I tried to call for help, But my phone displayed only static. No signal, no GPS, no connection. The fog thickened, swallowing the edges of the marsh until I couldn't see the truck I had parked behind me. Panic clawed at my chest. I was trapped in a living maze. A whisper came, carried by the hum. "Stay, or join us." It was layered, almost many voices speaking as one. My mind felt invaded, memories and fears pried open. I clutched my camera, hoping its lens could somehow protect me, or at least record the horror. I noticed a faint path, not formed by earth or water, but by light. It was narrow and serpentine, leading toward a denser part of the marsh. The figures glided along its edges, never touching it, as if it were sacred territory. I had to make a choice: follow the light and risk the unknown, or retreat and risk being consumed by the marsh itself. I stepped forward. The path led me deeper into the marsh than I had ever ventured. The lights shifted, forming intricate patterns, almost like a message I couldn't decipher. Every step was a battle. Mud clung to me, pulling me down, slowing my progress. The figures watched silently, their glowing eyes tracking my every move. Occasionally, one drifted closer, hovering inches above the water. Its elongated limbs stretched unnaturally, and when it tilted its head, I felt its awareness probing my mind. Images of my family, my childhood, moments I had buried surfaced with terrifying clarity. I raised my camera again, snapping photos, but the flash only made them recoil briefly. They were patient. They were waiting. Their glow pulsated in rhythm with the hum, creating an almost hypnotic effect. I fought the urge to collapse, to fall into the mud and let the marsh claim me. Ahead, a small clearing emerged, water pooling in concentric circles. The lights hovered above it, forming a perfect ring. My instinct screamed this was a trap, but curiosity and survival instinct pushed me forward. Then the hum stopped. Silence, absolute silence. The lights dimmed, forming a single point in the center of the clearing. I knew this was the climax. The marsh demanding a choice I might not survive. I approached the center of the clearing cautiously. The single point of light pulsed slowly, almost like a heartbeat, radiating a warmth that felt both comforting and poisonous. My boots sank into the mud with every step, and the whispers of the marsh returned, layered and insistent. "Come, join, stay." I raised my camera again, hands shaking. When I peered through the lens, I saw more than the lights. Faces emerged from the mist, pale, elongated, eyes glowing faintly like the figures themselves. Some were familiar, echoes of missing hikers and travelers, frozen in silent screams. The marsh had collected them, preserving their terror as a warning. A sudden surge of movement made me stumble backward. One of the figures drifted closer than before, its eyes boring into mine, conveying a sense of ancient intelligence. My instinct screamed to flee, but the mud held me fast, and the surrounding fog had thickened to an impenetrable wall. The pulsing light suddenly shot upward, splitting into multiple points, spinning faster around the clearing. The figures followed, forming a vortex. I realized the marsh was preparing to claim me fully, and the only way to survive was to resist with every ounce of will I had. I swallowed hard and forced my legs to move, stepping toward the outer edge of the clearing, searching for a way out. I staggered along the muddy path, barely keeping balance as the vortex of lights followed me, pulsating rhythmically. The whispers layered over my thoughts, attempting to control my movements, whispering fears I hadn't shared with anyone. My heart pounded as I realized that hesitation could make me a permanent addition to the marsh. Suddenly, a figure hovered directly in front of me, blocking my path. Its limbs were impossibly long, hands brushing the water as it moved. I froze, but instinctively raised the camera and snapped a photo. The flash caused the figure to recoil, letting out a high-pitched shriek that echoed across the marsh, blending with a humming. I ran, mud sucking at my boots, lights spinning overhead in a chaotic dance. Every step forward was a struggle, but I forced myself to keep moving. The marsh was alive, aware, intelligent. It hunted without pursuing, luring its prey to exhaustion before striking. After what felt like an eternity, the path opened into a dry section of ground, just wide enough for my truck. I didn't stop. I climbed in, started the engine, and sped away. Behind me, the lights slowly faded. The whispering ceased. But the marsh left a permanent imprint on my mind. I survived the night. But I knew the lights were patient. They would wait for the next traveler, ready to weave their trap again. The following days, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. Every time I drove past marshes or foggy terrain, my skin prickled, and I felt eyes on me. The photographs I had taken revealed more than I could see with my naked eyes. Ghostly figures in the background, elongated and distorted, and faint glows that had no source. I spoke to locals, mentioning strange lights, missing hikers, and the dense fog that seemed almost alive. They shook their heads, telling stories of travelers who vanished near the marshes. Some never found, others returned with hollow eyes and muted voices. Some even claimed the marsh had its own heartbeat, a pulsing presence that could bend reality. I returned to the area cautiously, following a path I thought was safe. The fog rolled in thick and fast, swallowing everything. The lights appeared again, faint this time, hovering just above the water. They were patient, observing me, testing boundaries. I tried reasoning with them silently, hoping my calm would grant me passage. But they were unfathomable, neither malevolent nor benign, simply aware, calculating, intelligent. The marsh had its rules, and I had to obey them to survive. I felt the pull again, subtle, like a tug on my soul, urging me deeper into the fog. I realized the marsh wasn't just a place. It was a predator. By the 8th night, I began to understand the rhythm of the marsh. The lights pulsed with an almost biological intelligence, appearing and disappearing in patterns that suggested planning and patience. Shadows moved independently, stretching unnaturally across water and mud, hinting at forms just beyond human comprehension. I followed a faint glow toward a dense cluster of reeds, where the water reflected more lights than I could count. Some moved in perfect synchronization. Others drifted randomly, but all seemed aware of my presence. I realized that they weren't just luring me. They were testing my instincts, my focus, my sanity. Suddenly, one figure separated from the others, gliding toward me silently. Its glowing eyes pierced my mind, exposing fears I had hidden from even myself. I stumbled, almost falling into a pool of water, but instinct and sheer will kept me upright. The lights pulsed faster, echoing the rhythm of my heartbeat. The whispering resumed, soft, commanding, yet unintelligible, but I could sense their intent. Stay, join, surrender. I forced myself to step backward, keeping my eyes locked on the figure. Slowly, cautiously, I traced a path out of the dense reeds, retracing my steps toward dry land. The marsh allowed it, but I knew the patience of the lights was limitless. By the 9th night, I had learned the marsh's patterns. The lights no longer startled me immediately, but a creeping unease persisted. Every movement, every step, was measured by something unseen. The marsh had a rhythm, and I was now a note within it, forced to move carefully, lest I be swallowed entirely. The lights gathered again, forming a slowly rotating ring around a central pool of water. The figures hovered at its edges, eyes glowing faintly, their elongated limbs slicing through the fog. The whispering hum rose, harmonizing with the rhythmic pulsing of the lights. It was almost musical, yet dissonant, filling my mind with unease. I realized the marsh wasn't merely intelligent. It learned from its victims, cataloging fear, shaping pathways, creating obstacles, and testing survival instincts. The glowing figures were extensions of its will, guides for those who survived and hunters for those who faltered. I moved along the edges, boots sinking into the mud, careful to avoid the central ring. Every step was a gamble. One misstep, and I would join the countless lost souls whose faces appeared faintly in the fog, trapped forever as part of the marsh's consciousness. I knew there was only one way to survive: maintain calm, move deliberately, and never give in to panic. Finally, I reached the edge of the marsh, where the mud gave way to dry earth and the fog thinned. The lights pulsed one last time, hovering above the water before dimming and retreating into the mist. The whispering faded, leaving an eerie silence that pressed against my eardrums. I collapsed on solid ground, breath ragged, heart pounding, staring back at the marsh. The glow had vanished, but the memory of those figures, their elongated forms, and the intelligent pulse of the marsh haunted me. Every photo I had taken captured fragments of them. Faint reflections, distorted limbs, and glowing eyes. Proof that my experience was real. I drove away slowly, never looking back. The marsh remained silent that day, but I knew its patience was endless. It did not forgive, it did not forget. Travelers could disappear instantly or be tormented for hours, even days, depending on the marsh's will. Years later, I still see faint lights in foggy wetlands, and my nightmares replay the pulsing glow and elongated forms. I survived, but I carry the memory like a scar. Reminder that the Manitoba marshes are alive, patient, and always watching. The lights wait, and one day they will call to another traveler, just as they called to me. My name is Ethan Crowley, and this happened when I was 25. I had been hiking alone in the remote forests of Manitoba, searching for abandoned cabins to photograph. The area was isolated, paths hidden beneath fallen leaves and snow, places where help did not reach. After hours of walking, I stumbled upon a small wooden cabin, half buried in snow and ice. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney, though I hadn't seen any other human presence for miles. Curiosity pushed me forward. The door creaked open with a slight touch, revealing a dark interior. Inside, the air was cold but strangely still. I noticed furniture covered in dust, old photographs pinned to the walls, and a rocking chair swaying slightly as if recently used. I felt an unsettling sensation, as though I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the door slammed behind me. My heart raced, echoing in the empty room. The photographs seemed to change, the eyes of people in the frames subtly tracking my movement. I realized this cabin was not abandoned. Something, or someone, watched me. I tried the door. Locked, no handle, no key, just solid wood. Panic gripped me. The cabin seemed to breathe, floorboards creaking under invisible weight. Shadows moved unnaturally across the walls, stretching and twisting with no source. I explored cautiously. In one corner, a mirror reflected not my face, but a shadowed figure standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. Only the rocking chair moving back and forth. Then I heard it. A low whisper, almost a hiss, coming from the fireplace. "Stay!" I rushed to the window. Thick snow blocked the view, The forest outside seemed to pulse, trees bending subtly as if alive, watching. My instincts screamed to leave, but the cabin refused to let me go. I backed into a corner, heart hammering. Dust swirled around me unnaturally, forming shapes that resembled figures frozen in terror. Every photograph on the wall seemed to shift, their faces more distorted, their eyes piercing my mind. I realized too late. The cabin wasn't just hiding something, it was alive, hungry for attention, feeding on the fear of those who dared enter. I backed away from the mirror, my breath shallow. The whispering grew louder, overlapping itself, forming words I couldn't comprehend. The cabin seemed to stretch, corners elongated, ceilings rising impossibly high. I tried to calm myself, telling my mind it was exhaustion, imagination. But deep down, I knew this place was different. A sudden draft slammed the door open for a fraction of a second, letting in the freezing night air. I glimpsed the forest outside, trees twisting unnaturally, shadows crawling along the snow. When the door slammed shut again, I noticed something impossible. A new photograph on the wall, freshly printed, depicting me standing exactly where I was. The rocking chair began moving faster, almost violently, creaking in rhythm with the whispering. Figures formed from the dust, tall, thin, and distorted, circling me silently. I realized the cabin was recording fear, shaping its own inhabitants into the walls, the furniture, and the shadows. I needed a plan. I grabbed a heavy chair, ready to defend myself, and edged toward the door. Every step felt like walking through water, slow and resistant, as if the cabin itself opposed my movement. I reached for the door handle, but my hand passed through solid wood. The cabin pulsed beneath me, floors and walls shifting subtly. The whispering intensified, now chanting a distorted melody in a language I didn't know. My heart raced as panic rose, yet I forced myself to move forward. The mirror in the corner reflected my every move, but the reflection was wrong. My eyes blackened, my face twisted with fear. I turned away, only to see the rocking chair now occupied by a dark figure, swaying slowly, watching me. The dust figures formed a line toward the fireplace, glowing faintly as if absorbing the warmth of the flickering flames. I understood. They were feeding on fear, gaining strength with every heartbeat, every gasp I made. I tried to shout, but no sound came out. The cabin seemed to absorb my voice, my presence, integrating me further into its twisted environment. I realized the only way out was to think differently. Not fight the cabin, but find a weak point in its awareness. I remembered a small trapdoor in the corner, half hidden beneath an old rug. Crawling toward it, I felt the floor pulse beneath me, as though the cabin sensed my intent. The dust figures paused, staring, almost studying me. My pulse raced. The whispering faded into a low hum as I lifted the trapdoor. Cold air from below rushed out, carrying a faint scent of earth and decay. I could barely see the narrow stairwell, but it promised a path away from the oppressive interior. As I descended, the cabin seemed to protest, walls bending inward, shadows reaching toward me. I felt icy fingers brush my skin, pulling, tugging, trying to keep me inside. The hum grew louder, vibrating in my chest. I didn't stop. Step by step, I moved downward, relying on the faint glow of the stairwell to guide me. Each second felt like hours. The cabin's awareness seemed concentrated at the entrance above, desperate to reclaim me. Finally, I reached the bottom, opening a small door leading outside. Moonlight spilled over snow, and I ran without looking back, hearing the faint creaking and whispering fade behind me. I emerged into the forest, snow crunching beneath my boots. the moon reflected off icy branches, the cabin nowhere in sight. The oppressive weight lifted, but the memory of the interior lingered. The photographs, the dust figures, the whispering, they felt alive, as if part of me had been left behind. I ran until dawn, eventually reaching a small town. Locals gave me wary looks as I told fragments of my story, but few believed me. Some mentioned the area had a reputation for vanishing cabins and travelers who disappeared without a trace. I never returned. The forest remains, quiet and still, but the memory haunts me. Sometimes, in dreams, I see the rocking chair, the dust figures, and the mirror reflecting not me, but someone or something, watching patiently, waiting. The cabin waits too, patient, intelligent, and hungry. It does not forgive. It does not forget. For anyone wandering the remote forests of Manitoba, it could appear, and once it does, escape is never guaranteed. Weeks later, I returned to Manitoba, drawn by curiosity and disbelief. I drove to the area where the cabin had appeared, cautiously scanning the dense forest. Nothing looked familiar. No trail, no signs of the cabin. Only snow-covered trees stretching endlessly. I stepped onto the forest floor. The air was still, heavy, almost conscious. Then I noticed faint impressions in the snow, footprints leading in a direction that shouldn't exist. My heart thumped. I knew the cabin could reappear, but this time it might not allow me to leave. A low hum rose, barely audible, echoing through the trees. Shapes formed in the distance, dust-like figures gliding just above the snow. I froze, memories of the rocking chair and mirrored face flashing in my mind. The whispers returned, fragmented, teasing, urging me to approach. Come, see, stay. Every instinct screamed to run, yet I couldn't move. The forest and its hidden cabin were alive, aware of me, patient. I backed away slowly, realizing the cabin's influence extended far beyond its walls. It was a predator, waiting for anyone curious or foolish enough to return. I retraced my steps, trying to resist the pull of the forest. The snow shifted unnaturally, forming shapes that mimicked movement, branches like fingers, shadows stretching toward me. Every sound was amplified. The crunch of snow, distant snapping branches, faint whispers curling in the air. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, silhouetted against the faint moonlight. It was elongated, humanoid, almost as if the cabin itself had taken form. I froze, heart hammering, but it made no move to approach. Instead, it hovered, observing, studying. I felt the forest itself respond, the snow compacting under invisible weight, trees bending subtly, shadows swaying unnaturally. The cabin's reach extended far, a predator that could manipulate its environment, using fear as bait. I forced myself forward, taking small, careful steps. Each step felt like a negotiation with the unknown, a test of endurance and courage. The figure remained still, waiting, patient, reminding me that curiosity had a price in these woods. As I neared the area where the cabin had first appeared, the temperature dropped suddenly. Frost formed on my eyelashes and eyebrows, breath visible in sharp clouds. The footprints in the snow grew more distinct, unnaturally deep, as if someone or something had anticipated my movements. The whispers intensified, overlapping and echoing around me, almost intelligible. You can't leave? You can't hide. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced focus, realizing that fear was the cabin's weapon. Suddenly, a soft glow appeared through the trees. Not a fire, not a lantern, but a faint, pulsating light. It was the cabin, or a semblance of it, materializing within the forest. Its presence was undeniable, oppressive, commanding. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my legs felt leaden. I realized then that the cabin could exist anywhere, untethered by reality, feeding on curiosity, fear, and attention. Survival meant more than fleeing. It meant outthinking something beyond human comprehension. With trembling hands, I turned away, moving slowly toward the edge of the forest, every sense on high alert, knowing the cabin could appear at any moment. By dawn, I finally reached a clearing. The glow had vanished, the whispers faded, and the forest returned to a deceptive calm. My legs shook from exhaustion, but the terror lingered. I realized the cabin had marked me, its influence lingering long after its disappearance. I left the area immediately, driving hours away to the nearest town. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by visions of the rocking chair, dust figures, and the mirrored reflection of my fear. The cabin existed beyond normal rules, appearing and vanishing at will, a sentient trap in the heart of Manitoba's wilderness. Years later, I still dream of snow-covered floors, creaking rocking chairs, and whispers calling me back. I've learned one hard truth. The cabin doesn't forgive curiosity. It waits, patient, intelligent, hungry. Anyone wandering Manitoba's remote forests must beware. One day the cabin may appear for you, and escape may not be possible. My name is Clara Voss, and this happened when I was 22. I loved exploring Winnipeg's outskirts, where dense woods swallowed entire neighborhoods and trails disappeared into shadows. That night, I decided to hike alone, flashlight in hand, unaware that curiosity would lead me into something far beyond comprehension. The trees were unnaturally silent. No rustle of wind, no chirping birds, only the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. Soon, I noticed something moving in the shadows. Quick, fleeting shapes darting between trees. I told myself it was wildlife, but my instincts screamed otherwise. As I ventured deeper, the flashlight flickered. When it stabilized, I realized the shadows were not random. They mimicked human forms, stretching and twisting unnaturally, disappearing whenever I tried to focus on them directly. A sense of being watched gripped me, heavier than any fear I had felt before. I quickened my pace, but every turn brought new shadows, silently tracking, patiently waiting. I felt the forest pulse around me, almost alive, aware of my every move. Something had marked me as prey. The shadows began to gather, forming shapes that resembled people, some crouching, others looming, elongated and distorted. Their presence wasn't physical, but mental, pressing against my thoughts, amplifying every fear I had ever known. I tried calling out, but my voice was swallowed by the woods. The flashlight flickered again, revealing brief glimpses of movement that felt too intelligent to be animals. A whisper reached my ears, soft, fragmented, unintelligible, yet unmistakably directed at me. "Don't run. Stay." I stumbled into a small clearing, thinking I might escape the enclosing shadows. Instead, I found symbols carved into the tree trunks, ancient, arcane patterns, glowing faintly in the dim light. The shadows hovered closer, circling the clearing, almost herding me. My instincts screamed to flee, but the forest had its rules. The longer I stayed, the stronger the pressure in my mind grew. Every heartbeat echoed unnaturally, synced with a pulsing rhythm that emanated from the shadows themselves. I realized this forest wasn't just haunted, it was alive, feeding on fear, bending reality around those who dared enter. Panic surged as I tried to backtrack. Every direction seemed wrong. The trees had shifted subtly, hiding the path I'd come from. The shadows followed, gliding rather than walking, maintaining a slow, deliberate pace. Suddenly, one shadow detached and floated closer. Its elongated form leaned toward me, and I felt a mental intrusion, as if it could read my memories and fears directly. My body froze, but I forced a step back, heart hammering, mind screaming to survive. The symbols on the trees began to pulse faintly, synchronized with the rhythm of my heartbeat. I realized the shadows were reacting to my fear, feeding on it, growing stronger with every shiver, every anxious glance. I gripped my flashlight tighter, shining it toward the central shadow. For a brief moment, it recoiled, letting out a wail-like sound that echoed through the trees, vibrating in my chest. I understood then. This forest was patient, and these shadows were its guardians, intelligent and deliberate. Escape would not be easy. It would require outsmarting something far beyond human comprehension. I ran, forcing myself along a twisted path I hoped led to safety. Leaves crunched underfoot, echoing unnaturally, as if the forest was amplifying my presence. Shadows moved ahead of me, cutting off potential escape routes, guiding me deeper into the woods. Then the whispering returned, fragmented voices overlapping, forming a chorus of impossible tones. Stay. Join. Fear. My mind reeled, trying to process both the physical and mental assault. I stumbled into a hollow, fallen tree trunk for cover, hoping it might shield me. A single shadow hovered above the trunk, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I could feel it penetrating my thoughts, exposing memories and regrets. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I wondered if I would vanish here, consumed by the forest itself. I knew I had to stay calm. Fear was the forest's weapon, and resisting it, focusing on finding logic amidst chaos, was my only chance to survive. Slowly, carefully, I crawled toward a narrow gap between trees, praying it wasn't another trap. The narrow gap led to a small clearing bathed in faint moonlight. Relief surged briefly, but the shadows weren't far behind. They moved with uncanny precision, herding me, testing my reactions, patient and calculating. I noticed a faint stream cutting through the clearing. The water reflected the moon, and for a moment, I saw something strange. The shadows hesitated near it, as if the reflection disrupted their power. My instincts screamed to use this chance. I leapt toward the stream, splashing into cold water. The shadows recoiled slightly, wailing in distorted tones. I scrambled along the bank, using the reflection to navigate, moving quickly but cautiously. Each step was a negotiation with the unknown, balancing speed and awareness. By the time I reached the far edge of the clearing, the shadows had retreated, merging into the tree line. The forest fell silent, but I knew it was only temporary. The Winnipeg woods were alive, patient, and intelligent. The shadows were guardians, waiting for the next intruder, and perhaps for me to return. I didn't stop running until the first signs of civilization appeared. The distant glow of streetlights and muffled city sounds. Yet, even there, the shadows lingered in my mind, and the sense of being watched refused to fade. At home, I reviewed the photos from my hike. They were blurry, distorted, yet some captured faint humanoid shapes lingering in the background, their glowing eyes just visible. I realized then that what I experienced in the forest wasn't just in my imagination. Sleep didn't come easily. Every shadow in my apartment seemed alive, shifting subtly, echoing the forms from the woods. Even in the city, I couldn't escape the forest's reach. I began researching local legends, stories of disappearances, and strange sightings in the outskirts of Winnipeg. Many spoke of humanoid shadows stalking the woods, intelligent and patient, preying on the curious. The forest had been doing this for decades, perhaps centuries. I understood a hard truth. Escaping physically wasn't enough. The Winnipeg woods left a mark on the mind, an indelible fear, ready to draw anyone back who dared wander near its edges. Weeks passed, and I tried returning to normal life. But the forest haunted my thoughts. Dreams replayed every step, every shadow, every whisper. Sometimes, in waking moments, I would catch a fleeting shape in my peripheral vision, vanishing when I turned. I revisited the photographs, noticing details I hadn't seen before. The shadows weren't random. They seemed aware of my presence, mimicking my movements, sometimes appearing where I least expected. The forest had imprinted itself on both my mind and my reality. One evening, I received a message on social media from an unknown account. "You cannot leave. You belong to the woods now." Panic surged. My instincts screamed to ignore it, but the shadows in my peripheral vision seemed to confirm the threat. I realized the Winnipeg woods were patient predators, not bound by time or space. They observed, tested, and waited for the right moment to strike. My life had been altered forever. I attempted to research more, but stories were scarce. Locals were tight-lipped, warning outsiders to never enter the dense forest after dark. A pattern emerged. The shadows targeted those who were curious, those who strayed from safety, and they could manipulate perception to lead prey deeper into the woods. One night, I received a photograph in an email I hadn't sent. It was of me, taken from a distance, standing near the edge of the woods, eyes wide with fear. The sender was anonymous, but I knew who or what had sent it. The whispers returned in dreams, unintelligible yet commanding. My mind felt invaded, as though the forest had left a fragment of itself behind, a tether linking me to the shadows. I tried rationalizing, avoiding forests, lights, and even reflections. But the connection persisted. The Winnipeg woods were intelligent, patient, and unrelenting. I realized then that survival didn't just mean leaving. They followed mentally, tracking fear and curiosity wherever it appeared. I had escaped the forest physically, but the shadows were never far behind. Months later, I tried confronting my fear. I returned to the outskirts, camera in hand, determined to document the phenomenon. The forest was still almost welcoming, but I knew better. Every instinct warned me. As I walked deeper, shadows emerged again, elongated, human-like, moving with intent. My heart pounded, yet I forced myself to observe. The shadows didn't attack. They tested, mirrored, and measured. Each step forward felt like negotiation with an intelligent predator. I noticed glowing symbols carved into tree trunks, faint but unmistakable, similar to markings I had glimpsed before. They pulsed subtly, in rhythm with my heartbeat. A figure detached from the group, floating closer. Its glowing eyes pierced my mind, reflecting my own fear back at me. I realized the Winnipeg woods weren't just shadows. They were extensions of something ancient and patient, watching, recording, and learning from every visitor. Escape was possible, but only if one controlled fear completely. One lapse, and the forest would claim you as it had others before me. I backed away slowly, keeping eyes on the figure, using the glowing symbols as reference points. The forest seemed to breathe, the shadows pausing and observing my retreat. Step by careful step, I reached the outer edge, where city lights shimmered faintly in the distance. I never turned back. Even months later in dreams, I relived the elongated forms, the glowing eyes, and the whispering chorus. The Winnipeg woods had left their mark, not just on my memory, but on my mind. I learned that some forests are alive in ways humans cannot fully comprehend. The shadows are patient hunters, waiting for curiosity to lure prey into their domain. Survival isn't guaranteed, and once the woods have marked you, they watch indefinitely. I carry the knowledge everywhere I go. Avoid the outskirts, respect the trees, and never underestimate what waits silently in the shadows. The Winnipeg woods are intelligent, hungry, and eternal. And one day they may call someone else into their darkness. My name is Lucas Hartman, and this happened when I was 27. I was driving late along a remote stretch of Manitoba highway, surrounded by endless darkness and isolated small towns where help does not reach. The road was empty, the kind of emptiness that presses on your mind. It makes every sound feel amplified. About an hour into the drive, my headlights caught something strange on the side of the road, a figure standing motionless, dressed in tattered clothing, face obscured. I slowed down, curiosity fighting my instincts, but the figure didn't move. Suddenly, the silhouette disappeared. I blinked, thinking it was a trick of the shadows. Then my car radio crackled, emitting static and faint whispers. "Don't turn back. Don't stop." My heart raced. The highway felt alive, watching, testing me. I realized I had entered a section of road where reality twisted and ordinary logic no longer applied. The whispers continued, overlapping, unintelligible yet somehow intelligible to my mind. Every mile I drove, the darkness seemed to thicken, stretching the road unnaturally, the trees lining the highway bending subtly, as if leaning closer to watch. Suddenly the headlights flickered, revealing another figure standing in the middle of the road. My pulse surged and I slammed the brakes, but the car didn't stop in time. The figure vanished before impact, leaving only the smell of damp earth and something metallic. Panic surged, but I forced myself to stay calm. My hands gripped the wheel as the radio hissed warnings. "You belong here. You cannot leave." The highway itself felt alive, reshaping and manipulating space around me, feeding on fear. I realized this stretch of road was a predator, patient and intelligent, selecting those who dared drive alone after dark. Escape wouldn't just be physical. It required control over my own mind. I continued driving, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. The darkness pressed in from all sides, and the air inside the car felt heavy, almost alive. Every tree along the highway seemed to twist slightly, shadows forming humanoid shapes that flickered in the corners of my vision. The radio crackled again, louder this time, faint words emerging from the static. "You cannot leave. Turn back." My hands tightened on the steering wheel, adrenaline surging, but I forced myself to keep moving. Out of the fog, a faint glow appeared. Headlights, or maybe something else entirely. As I approached, the glow pulsed unnaturally, like it was breathing, and the road beneath my tires seemed to ripple. Every instinct screamed that I was being observed, tested. I understood then that this highway wasn't just haunted, it was alive, feeding on fear and curiosity, shaping its own traps for those foolish enough to drive alone. The next mile felt endless. Time itself seemed to stretch. Signs and landmarks appeared, then vanished, as if the highway didn't want me to navigate normally. Another figure emerged in the fog. A woman, pale, motionless, her hair floating unnaturally. I braked hard, but the car slid slightly, tires crunching over unseen gravel. When I blinked, she was gone. Only the whispering remained, weaving through the static of the radio. "Join us. Stay forever." Fear was rising, but I forced myself to focus. The road warped subtly, dips and rises creating illusions of movement in the fog. Shadows along the trees bent toward me, reaching, stretching, waiting for a single misstep. I realized the haunted highway wasn't a place. It was a predator, using the mind against the body, ensuring every driver who entered felt hunted, trapped in a living nightmare. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, keeping my focus on the faint glow ahead. The whispers escalated into a cacophony, voices overlapping, forming distorted commands. Stop. Leave. Stay. My heart pounded, every instinct screaming to escape. Suddenly, the fog cleared for a moment, revealing a stretch of road lined with abandoned vehicles, each covered in frost, as if frozen in time. I felt a chill ripple through my body, realizing these weren't ordinary cars. They belonged to drivers who had vanished along this highway, perhaps decades ago. I knew I had to remain calm. Fear was the highway's weapon, and panic would make me easy prey. I focused on the reflections in my windshield, the faint moonlight, any markers that could guide me safely. The highway pulsed beneath my tires, almost sentient. But for the first time, I felt a slim chance to outthink it. Survival required wit, not speed. As I drove past the frozen vehicles, I noticed one in particular. A truck with shattered windows. Inside, a faint silhouette crouched. The headlights flickered, revealing glowing eyes that seemed to follow me, though the truck remained stationary. The whispers softened, almost contemplative. Yet every instinct told me it was aware of my thoughts, measuring my fear, calculating my next moves. The road ahead straightened slightly, the fog thinning just enough to glimpse the tree line. I kept driving slowly, deliberately, choosing each movement carefully. The highway seemed to shift subtly in response, bends tightening, shadows elongating, trees leaning ever closer. Finally, the faint lights of a distant town appeared. The shadows lingered at the edges of the fog, waiting for me to falter. I realized then that the haunted highway would never forget me. It had marked me, and I carried a tether to its darkness for the rest of my life. I reached the town, but the feeling of being watched didn't fade. Even under street lights, the shadows seemed to linger in corners, slipping through alleys and lingering just beyond sight. Every reflection, from shop windows to puddles, felt distorted, showing faint shapes that weren't mine. At home, I reviewed the dashcam footage from my drive. Most of it was static, but in brief frames, shadowy figures appeared on the roadside, vanishing when I looked directly. It became clear. The highway was recording and replaying fear, capturing moments of vulnerability and storing them in the fog. Sleep was impossible. Every creak in my apartment sounded like footsteps on the highway. The whispers from the radio haunted my dreams, echoing, "You belong to us. You cannot leave." I realized the highway didn't just trap bodies. It trapped minds, feeding on curiosity, fear, and attention, ensuring its victims carried a permanent connection to its darkness. Weeks later, I drove cautiously past the highway again, determined to test my control over fear. The fog thickened immediately, the road twisting unnaturally. Shadows appeared in the trees, elongated and humanoid, watching. I tried to focus on the headlights and road markings, ignoring the whispering from the radio, which seemed more insistent now. Stop. Stay. Forever. Every instinct screamed to accelerate, but the highway resisted, stretching and compressing, making my speed feel uneven. A glow appeared ahead, a vehicle frozen mid-motion, headlights flickering weakly. The silhouette of a figure crouched inside, glowing eyes fixed on me. I understood then that the highway punished curiosity, testing whether its prey could outthink its traps. I drove carefully, feeling the presence behind me, realizing that even in daylight, its influence lingered. The highway was not just a road. It was an intelligent, patient predator, always watching, always waiting. The whispers grew louder in my mind, not through the radio now, but as a voice I felt inside my skull. You cannot escape. The road remembers. My pulse quickened, but I forced rational thought. Fear was the highway's weapon, and panic meant death. I glanced at the roadside, noticing more abandoned vehicles, some older, some newer, all frozen in time. Their interiors contained faint, humanoid silhouettes, like echoes of drivers who had disappeared before me. Each car was a warning, a lesson in patience and horror. I realized the highway didn't kill, it captured, storing fear and curiosity within the fog, creating a network of trapped minds. Every shadow, every flicker of movement was a part of it, waiting for someone to falter. I drove on cautiously, aware that each mile was a negotiation with the sentient highway, one wrong move away from becoming another permanent echo. Finally, dawn broke and the fog thinned. The shadows faded into the tree line, leaving only a lingering unease in the air. I reached the next town, exhausted but alive. The whispers had disappeared, though the memory remained, etched into my mind. Even now, months later, I feel the highway's presence. Sometimes in dreams, I hear static whispers and see elongated figures in fog. I have learned that some roads are alive, patient, and intelligent, hunting those who wander after dark. The Manitoba Highway is not just a place. It is a predator, storing fear and curiosity, marking anyone who enters. Those who survive carry a tether to its darkness forever. I share my story as a warning. Never drive alone at night in remote areas, and never underestimate the highway that watches, waits, and remembers every step of your fear. My name is Ethan Carter, and this happened when I was 25. I was traveling through rural Manitoba, taking back roads between small, isolated towns. The land was flat, frozen in winter, and eerily quiet. Perfect conditions for a nightmare waiting to happen. As dusk fell, I spotted a lone farmhouse in the distance, dimly lit, smoke rising from the chimney. Curiosity drew me closer, though something about it felt off. The windows seemed darker than normal, absorbing the light rather than reflecting it. I parked nearby and approached on foot. The crunch of snow under my boots echoed unnaturally in the silence. The door was slightly ajar, inviting yet menacing. I hesitated, then pushed it open. Inside, the air was icy, stale, and smelled faintly metallic. I realized instantly that this farmhouse was not abandoned in any normal sense. It felt alive, aware of my presence, and waiting for me to enter fully. The farmhouse interior was dark, lit only by the fading light from broken windows. Every step I took made the wooden floor groan, as if warning me to leave. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, moving slightly when I wasn't looking directly at them. I noticed a staircase leading to the second floor. A faint humming sound echoed from above, soft but steady, like a lullaby gone wrong. My instincts screamed to turn back, but I was trapped by curiosity. As I climbed, the humming grew louder, harmonizing with my heartbeat. I reached the hallway, and the doors to the rooms seemed to twist subtly, bending in ways wood and paint should not allow. A mirror at the end reflected not only me, but faint, indistinct figures standing just behind me. I froze. The farmhouse was observing me, testing me, feeding off my fear. Every instinct screamed that leaving now would be impossible if I lingered too long. I cautiously opened the first door on the left. Inside was a small bedroom, frozen in time, with a bed covered in dust and a rocking chair swaying slightly, though no breeze entered the room. A faint whisper echoed, almost beckoning me closer. I stepped in, and the door slammed shut behind me. My heart leapt as I tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The rocking chair stopped abruptly, and a shadow materialized in the corner, a tall, faceless figure observing me. I froze, feeling an overwhelming pressure in my chest, as if the house itself were constricting me. The mirror from the hallway reflected more figures, now clearer, standing silently. Panic surged, but I forced myself to focus. I realized the farmhouse didn't just trap people. It absorbed them, leaving only echoes and shadows behind. Desperate, I rushed to the next room. This one appeared to be a kitchen, but everything seemed distorted. Cabinets were warped, countertops twisted. The faint metallic smell grew stronger, mixing with the stale air. Suddenly, I noticed handprints forming on the frosted windows, appearing and disappearing, as if someone, or something, was tracing me. The shadows in the corners shifted, lengthening unnaturally toward me. A low humming chant began from beneath the floorboards, vibrating through my feet. The farmhouse was alive, aware, intelligent, feeding on fear and curiosity alike. I realized the whispers, the figures, the distortions, all were tests, drawing me further into the house. I frantically searched for an exit, only to find that the hallways had changed. Doors I had passed were gone, replaced by walls that hadn't existed before. The farmhouse had trapped me fully, manipulating space and perception. I climbed the staircase to the second floor, each step groaning as if protesting my presence. The humming intensified, and now I felt whispers directly inside my mind, fragmented words like, "Stay forever." At the top, the hallway stretched impossibly long. Doors lined each side, and faint figures flickered behind the frosted glass of some. The mirror at the end reflected not just me, but dozens of shadowy silhouettes, all staring, all patient. I tried opening a door, only to find it led to a room identical to the one I had left downstairs. Panic surged. The farmhouse wasn't following normal rules of space. It had reshaped reality around me, bending hallways, rooms, and even time to trap me. I realized then that fear was its sustenance, and curiosity was its key. Escape required controlling both, or I would remain trapped as another whisper in its walls. I tried retracing my steps, but every door led me deeper into confusion. The house was shifting subtly with every movement I made. Shadows moved independently of light sources, stretching toward me, observing, almost communicating. The humming turned into faint laughter, distorted and cold. I realized the farmhouse had trapped not just my body, but my mind, feeding off panic and anticipation. Even my own reflection seemed unfamiliar, distorted, as if the house were rewriting reality to confuse me. I finally reached a window and looked outside. The world beyond seemed distant, hazy, like I was seeing it through a thick fog. The farmhouse wasn't bound by walls. It extended into perception, warping the environment around me. I understood then that survival wouldn't be simple. I had to remain calm, think logically, and resist fear, or I would vanish like the countless echoes that haunted the house before me. I forced myself to move down the warped hallways, every step echoing unnaturally. The shadows seemed to anticipate my movements, stretching and twisting just out of reach. The humming had escalated into a low chant, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. I noticed a door slightly ajar with a dim light spilling out. Cautiously, I approached. Inside was a living room frozen in time, dust thick on furniture. A rocking chair moved slowly on its own, and in the fireplace flickered ghostly images of people. Past victims, I realized, frozen in torment. Panic threatened to overtake me, but I forced calm. I had to observe, not react. The farmhouse thrived on fear. I understood then that it wasn't just a structure, it was sentient, reshaping reality, warping time, and feeding on the mind. Every instinct screamed to leave. But the house refused to let me go without testing me fully. I turned back toward the hallway, but it had changed again. Doors and walls shifted subtly, as if alive. Shadows flickered and elongated, reaching for me, whispering incoherent words that I somehow understood. Stay. Join us. Forever. I realized the farmhouse had trapped me not physically, but psychologically. Every step I took felt manipulated, every hallway designed to disorient me. The air grew colder, heavier, and the metallic smell intensified. A mirror reflected my terrified expression, but behind me, I saw dozens of faint, distorted figures. Others who had been trapped, their faces frozen in eternal fear. I knew that once curiosity drew someone in, the house never truly released them. I forced myself to focus, controlling my fear, remembering landmarks from earlier rooms. Survival wasn't just about moving. It was about outthinking the sentient traps surrounding me. I found a staircase leading downward, partially hidden behind a warped wall. My instincts screamed danger, but it seemed like the only possible escape. Each step creaked underfoot, the sound amplified, bouncing off warped walls. At the base, a dimly lit cellar revealed rows of empty crates and shelves, each marked with strange symbols that glowed faintly. Shadows pooled in the corners, forming humanoid shapes that shifted subtly, tracking my movements. The whispers and chanting intensified, as if the house were aware I had discovered its hidden core. I realized then that the farmhouse was more than sentient. It was ancient, patient, and cruel. It could manipulate perception, space, and time, feeding on fear for decades. I steeled myself. To survive, I had to remain calm, ignore the whispers, and retrace my steps carefully, even as the shadows pressed closer, watching, learning, testing my mind. Finally, I saw a faint light ahead, a door slightly open, revealing the snow-covered ground outside. I moved cautiously, shadows trailing me, stretching toward the exit. Each step was a negotiation, the house resisting my escape. I emerged into the cold night, gasping. The farmhouse loomed behind me, its dark silhouette static yet somehow alive, pulsing subtly as if aware I had survived. The whispers faded, but left a lingering chill in my mind. I never returned, but the experience stayed with me. I understood that some places are sentient, patient predators, manipulating space and perception, feeding on fear and curiosity. The farmhouse in Manitoba wasn't just haunted. It was alive, ancient, and eternally hungry. Anyone who enters carries a tether to its darkness forever, a silent mark that follows them for the rest of their life. My name is Samantha Reed, and this happened when I was 19. I had gone camping with two friends deep in the forests of Manitoba, far from any small town or road. The trees were dense, the darkness absolute, and the air carried a stillness that pressed on your mind. The first night, we built a small fire and shared stories, laughing to mask an unease that none of us could shake. Around midnight, the forest seemed to breathe. A low whisper echoed, though there was no wind. Something moved between the trees, shapes too tall and thin to be human, gliding silently. We shrugged it off, telling ourselves it was imagination. but the feeling of being watched persisted. Every shadow seemed deliberate, every sound amplified. The forest was alive, patient, and we were trespassers. The next day, we tried to follow a trail deeper into the forest, hoping to explore and find a nearby lake. The trees grew thicker, the path narrowing until it disappeared completely, replaced by fog curling unnaturally between trunks. We heard whispering again, indistinct words carried on the wind, or so we thought. One friend, Michael, swore he saw movement out of the corner of his eye, a figure crouched low, watching, then vanishing the moment he looked directly. Our nerves frayed. We debated returning, but curiosity and pride urged us onward. The forest seemed to react to our hesitation, shadows stretching toward us, branches snapping without wind, as if the trees themselves were alive. By nightfall, we set up camp again, but nothing felt safe. The forest was patient, aware, and every crackling twig heightened our fear. We weren't alone, and we knew it. As night fell, the whispers grew louder, overlapping with distant rustling in the underbrush. Every step we took was mirrored by subtle movements in the shadows. I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching, calculating, and waiting. Suddenly, a low growl echoed through the trees. My heart raced. We shone flashlights in every direction, revealing nothing but twisting branches and creeping fog. Michael's flashlight flickered, and for a brief moment, I swore I saw a pale, elongated figure gliding between the trunks, almost floating above the ground. We huddled close, whispering plans to leave at first light. The forest seemed to respond, tightening around us, compressing the path we had come from. Every instinct screamed to stay calm. But fear was rising faster than reason. I realized then that the forest wasn't just haunted, it was alive, feeding on our panic and curiosity. Survival depended on controlling our minds, not just our bodies. We tried retracing our steps, but the forest had shifted subtly. Familiar landmarks vanished, replaced by unfamiliar trees and thick undergrowth. The whispers followed, forming almost coherent words. "Stay, don't leave, join us." A distant light flickered between the trees, not like a fire, but a cold, unnatural glow. Against our better judgment, we approached, hoping for a sign of civilization. As we got closer, the glow intensified, and shadows coalesced into humanoid forms, tall, faceless, and impossibly thin. Panic surged, but I forced myself to focus. The creatures didn't move aggressively. They observed, almost amused, letting us think we could escape. The forest itself seemed to pulse in rhythm with the whispers, guiding us, testing us, ensuring we were aware of our fear at every moment. We realized the forest wasn't just a setting. It was the predator, patient and intelligent, and we were its prey. We stumbled backward, trying to leave, but the path ahead twisted unnaturally, folding back on itself. The fog thickened, and whispers escalated, almost surrounding us. Every tree seemed alive, bending subtly toward us, closing off options. Suddenly, I heard Michael scream. I spun around. He pointed to a shadow crouched low among the roots. The creature was unnervingly still, but its eyes glowed faintly, fixed on us. Fear paralyzed me. I realized running blindly would only make the forest tighter. We took slow, deliberate steps, staying together, focusing on breathing and mental control. The forest seemed to react, shadows stretching, whispering louder, but allowing us incremental progress. Survival required patience, composure, and ignoring the primal fear rising in our veins. For the first time, I understood the forest's intelligence. It fed on terror, but respected willpower, testing us without immediate harm. Hours passed, and dawn approached slowly. The whispers diminished, replaced by the sound of wind through the trees. The fog thinned slightly, and the forest seemed to relax, though not fully. We reached a clearing where the sunlight barely pierced the thick canopy. Relief surged, but the sense of being watched never left. The shadows had retreated, but faint movements among distant trees reminded us that the forest never truly releases its prey. I glanced back at the path we had traversed, the twisted undergrowth, the unnaturally bent trees, and realized the forest had marked us. Even if we escaped physically, its presence would linger, shaping our dreams, our thoughts, and our fears. We left quickly, glancing over our shoulders with every step. The forest had tested us, feeding on fear, curiosity, and hope, leaving an indelible mark on our minds. By late morning, we found what appeared to be an old logging trail, and a faint sense of hope crept in. The forest seemed less hostile, though a lingering unease remained. Every step reminded me that this place was alive, aware, and patient. We paused near a moss-covered boulder, catching our breath. Then we noticed faint footprints that weren't ours, elongated, thin, and disappearing into the fog. They weren't animal tracks. They were deliberate, human-like, yet unnaturally long and narrow. The whispering returned softly, almost contemplative, as if the forest was acknowledging our attempts to survive. Shadows flickered at the edges of our vision, not aggressive, but ever watchful. I realized the forest didn't simply hunt. It studied, calculated, and learned. Those who survived were marked, always tethered to its presence, carrying the memory of its sentience in their minds. We continued carefully, stepping over twisted roots and uneven ground. The whispering faded further, replaced by distant sounds of birds and running water, though everything still felt off, unnaturally quiet in parts. Suddenly, Michael froze, pointing to a shadow at the edge of the trail. It wasn't moving, but its shape was unmistakably humanoid, tall, thin, and faceless. I held my breath, but it didn't approach. It seemed to observe and judge, then melted into the fog like smoke. We pressed on, understanding that the forest was testing our awareness, our composure, and our fear. Every careful step mattered. One misstep could awaken the forest's full attention, drawing us back into its nightmare. By mid-afternoon, the fog lifted, and signs of human activity, old cabins, rusted tools, appeared faintly, hinting at a path back to civilization. As we neared the outskirts of the forest, I felt the tension ease slightly, though every instinct remained alert. The forest had allowed us passage, but its presence lingered. The whispering returned one final time, soft and almost approving. You survived. For now. We emerged into a clearing where the sun shone fully, revealing the lake we had sought. Relief and disbelief surged. The trees behind us seemed ordinary, yet I knew better. They were patient predators, shaping shadows and perceptions to trap the unwary. Looking back, I saw faint silhouettes among the distant trees, humanoid and unnervingly still. I realized the forest wasn't just haunted, it was alive, patient, and eternal, feeding on fear and curiosity for decades. The lake shimmered peacefully, masking the horrors we had endured. But I knew the forest would remember us, and we would never forget it. Finally, we reached a logging road, signs of civilization and the distant hum of traffic giving us a sense of safety. The forest behind us seemed quiet, but the memory of it was alive in our minds, pulsing like a heartbeat. Even now, years later, I feel its presence in dreams. The whispering, the shadows, the elongated figures moving silently between trees. The forest had marked us, leaving an indelible tether that could never be broken. I tell this story as a warning. Curiosity in unknown wilderness has a price. The forest of Manitoba is patient, intelligent, and observant. Those who wander too far, alone or unprepared, may escape physically, but never mentally. We survived, but the lost campers of Manitoba carry a permanent shadow of its sentience, a reminder that some places are alive, aware, and eternally hungry. My name is Ethan Cole, and this happened when I was 26, working winter maintenance near Lake Winnipeg. I took the job because it paid well and because I needed distance from my family, from my past, from the guilt that followed me everywhere. Manitoba winters are cruel, but I thought cold was something I understood. The locals warned me about Blackroot Inlet, a stretch of lake that never froze properly. They said snowmobiles stalled there, compasses failed, and animals refused to cross. I laughed it off. I needed the overtime hours. The first night I worked near the inlet, the lake made a sound I had never heard before. Not cracking ice, but something deeper, like breath moving under glass. My radio hissed constantly, picking up nothing but static and what sounded like distant knocking. Around 2 a.m., my truck headlights swept across the lake, and something moved beneath the ice. Not a shadow, not a reflection. Something large, slow, deliberate. I told myself it was pressure shifting. I told myself lots of things. But when I returned to the station at dawn, my boots were soaked, and I had no memory of stepping onto the ice. The next morning, my supervisor Raymond noticed my hands shaking. He'd lived in Manitoba his whole life and didn't scare easy. When I mentioned Blackroot Inlet, his face hardened. "Don't go near it alone again," he said. No explanation. I checked maintenance logs going back 20 years. Snowmobiles lost, ice fishermen missing, dogs found torn apart, but not eaten, always near the inlet, always winter. That night, I wasn't scheduled there. Yet my GPS rerouted me automatically, blinking directions I never entered. The radio turned on by itself. This time, I brought a flare gun. The ice looked thicker, solid, too solid. No cracks, no snow, just smooth, black glass. When I stepped out of the truck, the lake responded. The sound returned, slow, rhythmic, knock, knock, knock. From beneath my feet, my phone buzzed with a voicemail time-stamped 30 minutes in the future. It was my own voice, whispering, "Don't let it hear you breathing." That's when the ice bulged upward. I fired the flare straight down. The ice didn't shatter, it opened, like skin parting. Something pale pressed against the surface, studded with shapes that might have been eyes or scars. The lake began to drain sound. No wind, no radio, no breath. I ran. Behind me, ice cracked in long, pursuing lines. My truck doors were frozen shut. When I finally broke in, the windshield frosted instantly from the inside, as if something exhaled against it. In the rearview mirror, I saw ridges forming beneath the ice, following the truck as I drove. Fast. Raymond was waiting at the station. He didn't ask questions. He poured me coffee and locked the doors. "It learns," he said, "every winter." That night, the power went out across 3 towns. Raymond finally told me the truth. The inlet sits over a sinkhole connected to underground water systems older than the lake itself. Something lived there before the freeze ever came. Indigenous elders warned settlers long ago, "Don't let it hear you. Don't let it learn your shape." But winter maintenance crews kept feeding it patterns, vehicles, radios, human routines. At dawn, search teams found my boot prints circling the inlet. perfectly spaced. Too perfect. I didn't remember walking them. The dreams started. I was underwater, looking up through ice, watching people walk above me. I knew their names. I knew how they moved. Raymond stopped showing up to work. On the 5th night, the lake called my phone again. This time, it used his voice. I went back, alone. The inlet was open water now, steaming in minus 30 degrees Celsius. The thing rose slowly, not fully, just enough for me to see its surface mimicry. Faces forming and dissolving. It didn't attack. It waited. I realized then. It didn't want bodies. It wanted patterns, routines, voices, memory. It wanted to replace us. I destroyed the station radios, burned logs, smashed GPS units. The lake screamed, not loud, but inside my skull. The dream stopped. Raymond's body was never found, but his truck still parks by the inlet some mornings. Warm engine, no footprints. I left Manitoba. But every winter, my phone rings, and the lake breathes on the other end.